let's take a minute to look at Visual Basic Data Type. So whenever you create data for your program, it needs to know what type of data you're creating. Here are some of the examples that we have. And you'll see that there's the name of the data type, what kind of data it stores, and how much memory it will take up. So for instance, if you want to create a data type which is a whole number, you would use an integer data type. Floating point number, you could use a single, but since we have more room in our computers now, more memory space, what we do is, instead of using a single data type, and you notice the range on this, and it only takes up 4 bytes, but instead of that, what we normally use now is a double data type. And if you need a number which is even more precise than a double data type, even larger than a double data type, we can go to a decimal data type. Let's take a look at an example of an integer data type. Now, an integer data type is going to be a whole number. And you can see the range of what's the highest value we can make as an integer and the lowest value that we can make as an integer. But let's go ahead and take a look at what an example of an integer data type would look like. I'm going to download some of the practice files from the textbook. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. This is a zip file of some of those practice files. I'm going to go ahead and download this. Once I've downloaded this, I want to extract this. And once I've extracted this, I can go find the particular application that I'm looking for, and I can go ahead and launch this. So I'm going to double click on the .sln file. So I'm going to use this as a place to practice some of these. So I'm going to go into, I've got a couple three buttons here. I have a text box and I have a label here. So I'm going to double click on this one and use this as a practice area. And I'm going to create a integer data type. Okay, once I have this integer data type, what I can do is that I can assign integer values to it. So an integer value might be something like 44. Or not only that, but I could also say add some value to it. And so now my integer example variable would be the result, the sum of 44 plus 3. And I can show that by displaying this in the, I've got a label, label.com, and I want to display this in the text area. And what I could do is that I could say that I want to display that result. Whoops. I want to display that result in that label. But anything that I store in that label, it wants to be the data type string. An int example is an integer or a number, and a string is just a string of characters, not numbers. A string is not a number. A string is just a string of characters. Any character that you can type in from the keyboard. And I know you can type numbers from the keyboard, but a string is stored is different from a number. You cannot, a string that is stored in a variable cannot be multiplied or divided or any mathematical operation. So it's different. So if I stored the number 47 in as a string, then I couldn't multiply or divide it. But if I store it as an integer, then I can do that. So what I want to do is display this result in this text box. And it's giving me a red squiggly line here. And what it's saying is that it wants to store only strings or display only strings in this label. It only wants to display strings in this example. And again, this is an integer. So what I can do is that I can convert this integer to a string. Okay. Okay. So now it doesn't have any problem with that. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Debug, start debugging. And when I do, I program this button. So when I click on this, it stores that number 47 into the label. Okay, exit this, go back to my coding. So what it did is I created an integer data type called int example. I assigned a number to it, in this case 44 plus 3, and assign that to that variable name. Now that that variable name has a value associated with it, what I wanted to do is display it in the label. But to display it in an integer in the label, I needed it to convert it into a string. Okay. Well, let's take a look at this app and see if we can practice some of the ideas about variables and converting variables. So here we have our sales. So this is going to be the gross amount of sales. And when I click on this button, I want to display 8% of those sales. So if I had a sales of $100 and I clicked on this, it would show me it was a commission of $8 or 8% of 100. If I click on this, it would show me $10 or 10% of the sales amount. So I'm going to go, let's program this. Okay, so I want to get rid of this. What I'm going to do is, and by the way, this button is saying when you click on this button that was named BTN Rate 8, execute this code that's between private and insub. Okay, so here's the code we want to execute. And first, I'm going to create a couple variables. And they are going to be of the double data type. And it gives me a green squiggly line because it's saying that you've created these variables, but you haven't used them yet. Well, let's go ahead and use them. So the text box, when the user type something into this text box, then I'm going to click on this button. It's going to get that value and calculate it and store the result in this label. Okay. So when I get a value from the text box, I want to convert it into a double data type. So anything from the text box is going to be not a number, but a string. So it means I have to convert it. And there's something called try parse, which says take whatever's in that text box, comma, and try to parse it or convert it into a double data type, and then store it in the variable called DVL sales. Okay, so take whatever was typed in the text box, try to convert it into a double data type, and store that result in the variable called double sales. So if I typed 100 into the sales text box, it would try to convert that into a double data type and store that 100.0 into double sales. Okay, so once I have that, what I can do is that I can do my calculation, and my calculation will be take that double sales and multiply it by 0.8, which is 8%. Okay, so there's my calculation. So I want to display that result in that label and in the text property of that label. But before I do, I need to convert that into a string. So I'm going to go with the convert again to a string, and then the parentheses, and inside what I want to convert to a string, which is DVL double Okay. So now when I run this, okay, so I'm going to type 100. Okay. So now when I type 100 into sales, it should take that value, convert it from a string into a number, do the calculation, multiply that by 0.08 or 8%, and place the result in this label. And there, it's done that. Okay. So, and then I would do the same thing for the other button, only 10%. Okay. So, a quick video on data types.